I'm sorry, Board Chair Dominguez, we are streaming.
Okay, welcome everyone to the first policy committee meeting of the year. And let me get rid of all these. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm getting signals that I have poor voice quality. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. Could we please have a roll call, Dr. Albright?
Janelle Astorga.
Here.
Ronaldo Tomorito.
Here.
Heather Benavides.
Here.
Courtney Jackson.
Here.
Josefina Dominguez.
Here. Our first item for consideration and action is adoption of the January 13th, 2025 Policy Committee meeting agenda. Before we do that, I'd like to make a brief statement. I want to share a few insights I've had. The Student Outcomes Focused Governance, or SOFG, framework encourages board members to watch recorded meetings with an eye on our adult behaviors, how we are honoring structural integrity of the framework. I watched the November policy meeting again and will eventually watch the December meeting. And I reflected on my own behavior and performance as chair. And so here are my reflections. First, I want to thank board member Astorga for trying to keep us on track. I felt short of my own standards in doing so. I will take charge, and that's a promise I make to myself and to fellow committee members and staff. I want to honor both board members and staff members' time. So to that end, meetings will be 1 hour at 45 minutes, and I will set my handy timer as a reminder. I will pause the discussion to wrap things up and to suggest agenda items or next steps for the following month's policy meeting. I'll work hard to avoid being distracted by unproductive, off-track comments and talk, and will ask all committee members to do the same. If 4 of us are in agreement, there's no sense in allowing further conversation or discussion after we've had our initial statements. We will have an opportunity to state our perspective and opinion once, but not to repeat or restate. That opportunity to state opinions or comments again can happen at the dais when the policy committee forwards its recommendations to the board. And so with that, I'd like for you to ask for a motion and a second for today's agenda. And quickly, please, we only have 42 minutes left.
I will move to adopt the January 13th, 2025 Policy Committee meeting agenda. This is Board Member Jackson.
And I'll second this is Board Member Benavides.
Move on to minutes approval. Our next item.
We need a roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm eager to get going. Yes, we do need a roll call vote.
Janelle Astorga.
Yes.
Ronaldo Tomorito. Heather Benavides.
Yes.
Courtney Jackson.
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes. And so now we move on to minutes approval. Our next item for consideration is to approve the minutes from the policy committee meeting on December 2nd, 2024. I ask for a motion and a second, please.
I move to approve the minutes from the Policy Committee meeting on December 2nd, 2024. This is Board Member Jackson.
I will second. This is Board Member Astorga.
Dr. Albright, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Janelle Astorga.
Yes.
Ronaldo Tomorito.
Yes.
Heather Benavides.
May I ask a quick question for clarification? I was not on the policy committee then, so am I okay to vote on this?
I think the minutes are
Okay.
available.
Yes.
Yeah.
Courtney Jackson.
Yes.
And Josefina Dominguez.
Yes. We move on to our action items. Action item 4.1. Our next item for consideration and action is to consider approval of the addition of section 4R, request for information policy and process, to the APS Board of Education Governance Manual. Presenters will be ad hoc chair and board member Tom Morito and myself. I asked for a motion in a sec. Oh, wait, did we? Yes, I asked for a motion and a second, please.
So a motion and a second to approve the 4R, and then you're going to move to discussion.
Yes.
Okay, so I move to approve the addition of section 4R, requests for information policy and process, to the APS Board of Education Governance Manual. This is Member Jackson.
I will second. This is Board Member Astorga.
A roll call vote, please, Dr. Albright.
I think
You're
we
supposed
have
to-
Yes, yes, yes. So we open
And
the floor again
presentation,
for
correct?
discussion. For discussion. And so, I believe some of you may have comments and observations to offer. Anyone?
Oh, I raised my hand, but
I can't, okay, there it is.
I don't know if you can see that I raised my hand.
Yes, Board Member Jackson.
Okay, no, okay. Just a couple of, sorry, hold on, let me get into it real quick. A couple of just suggestions that were that I noticed, as well as were kind of offered up in the suggestions that came in. This first one is my fault that I didn't catch it, but in looking at the document in 4R4, so where it says if the information is not readily available, and then readily available is defined. In that section, it's defined as readily available, but further down under the request for information, like in the very specific, the process, it's referred to as readily accessible. So I would like to request that up in 4R4, where it says readily available, that terminology be changed to readily accessible, so that the phrasing is consistent throughout the document. So that is my first request. Do you want to discuss my first request first?
Yeah, let's
Before
get that. Yeah, is everyone in agreement?
logical.
Or I should ask, is anyone in disagreement with that? Okay.
Okay. So Jessica, then if you're listening, which I'm sure you are, it would be reflected in 4 and also in 5, basically just in that top half where anything that says readily available needs to be switched to readily accessible. Okay, the second suggestion is down at the bottom where it says addendum to 4R, request for information process. Can the phrase of addendum just be removed, and it just be discussed as the request for information process? Because it's not an addendum to the policy, it's actually part of the policy. So that's just a request to remove that phrase.
Could you orient us again, please? Where
Sure,
are
at
you?
so at the bottom of the very first page, sorry, there's just a sentence that says addendum to 4R request for information process just a sentence. It's basically a heading.
Oh, I see, I see.
Just
Yes.
remove that heading.
Okay. And any discussion about that or concerns, other perspectives, or are we in agreement? Okay, I think there's an agreement there.
Okay. Can I move to my third one, or do you want me to?
Yes, no, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so the third one's going to probably require a little bit more discussion. So now we're on the second page, and this one, it's currently listed as number 7, where it starts with for information not readily accessible. So just to orient everyone to where I am. So it says the district must provide the requested material within 20 business days. If this is unreasonably difficult due to the factors, blah, blah, blah. So one of the suggestions that that came in was that, okay, if information is not readily accessible, there is a question of whether or not a board member actually needs that information in order to fulfill their duties. So a suggestion came in for information not readily accessible. So this is the new suggestion. For information not readily accessible, the superintendent will share the request with the board executive committee for them to weigh in during their next regular meeting as to whether the request is appropriate. If the majority of the executive committee determines that the request is appropriate, they will direct the superintendent and administration or administration to provide the requested materials to the full board within 20 business days. If this is unreasonably difficult due to factors like volume or location, the district may extend the timeline to 30 business days, but must notify the board member of the reason for the delay. So, well, I'll stop there.
I have a
I'm to
question.
just put that in the chat for folks too, so you can read it on your own if that's helpful.
Okay, so just to clarify, if a request is going to not be available within 20 business days, then we need to, basically what you're saying is we need to evaluate the appropriateness of the request. And so just, do you have an example in mind? Because it's hard for me to imagine why the length of the producing the documentation or whatever it is would be a determining factor in whether it was appropriate.
So, God, okay, I'm going to try to think of something off the top of my head. I am requesting the, let's see, the amount of money that has been, oh, I've got it here. The school lunch program has changed between one provider to another provider. And I'm really interested to know how much money potentially is going to be lost between each school, each of the 170 plus schools that we have. And I'm really interested to know if any money has been lost in between the change. And I would like the superintendent to get me that information because it's important. A constituent asked me, okay, and I'm totally just pulling this out of the air. So that's a question that I've asked. Well, what if finding that information it's going to take more than 20 business days, right? Like they're going to have to go to the schools. They're going to have to find receipts. See, I don't know. Like again, I'm just making this up.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an inappropriate, if it's if it's a request that's going to take more than 20 business days for them to get the information for me, because they're going to have to go to all 162 schools, the question then becomes, is that really information that I need as a board member? Like, is that really something that I need in order to fulfill my duties? I think
Mhm.
that's the underlying question that this is trying to answer.
Yeah, so then it would seem to me though, that the appropriateness of the request would be evaluated before the length of time it's going to take to find the information for efficiency purposes.
Yes, and hopefully that is addressed earlier up in the
Mhm. So then this is an added layer of kind of, is it appropriate? So we determine if it's appropriate, and then it is, but then it's going to take a while. It's going to take in excess of 20 days to gather the information. So then we again determine whether it's appropriate by taking it to the executive board.
I guess that's the suggestion that's come in. Yeah, is like, is it then
Okay.
a two-step process for how appropriate or worthwhile is this really for board member governance?
Okay.
I think that's the
Mhm.
question that came in.
Yeah. Okay, I have clarity now, and I was just asking to get a better understanding. I don't have a
Yeah.
thought either way.
I'm sorry, I didn't have a better idea offhand.
No, it was good.
If I may, I tried to put the statement in the chat, but our chat is disabled. Just wanted to let you all know. That's why I didn't do that. But I also have a comment. I have a concern when it has to go through the executive committee first in order to determine whether it's worthwhile or if it should be passed on to staff, just because I know that executive committee only meets once a month. So that can take even longer for the information to come to the board member if that's something that we decide to do. So I just wanted to put that information out there as well.
Thank you. And just, I noted the same concern, but I guess it depends after hearing Member Jackson's explanation. Board Member Tomorito? Do you have any comments?
I
or
just turned it up.
consideration?
I agree, because the executive committee only meets once a month, and that I think it also determines the information that is being asked for. My biggest thing in all of this is sometimes it should be the privilege of the board to ask the superintendent for what they need, only due to the relationship of the superintendent with board members. And I've asked for many questions and I've always gotten my answer. But I do know if it's based on other circumstances and the weighted issue of if it requires more information, then that it won't meet the deadline. I guess that would come to in the near future if that occurs, but I feel right now the immediacy of getting that answer to the board member will be weighted due to the committee, not only the executive committee only meeting once a month, and that may hinder the response for the board member. So I agree with Janelle and Josefina. And my dog is playing in the back and causing problems. So if I turn around and go there to stop, I will. That's why I'm not here.
I'd like to weigh in though on your example, Board Member Jackson, because I think it opens up the question, does it come from, I mean, is it more nuanced? The question that you're asking, the clarification that you're asking for. If the information is coming from our constituents, do we redirect them to Let's Talk, the Let's Talk platform, and then reserve the right to, follow up or be included in that response, so we know it's gotten taken care of?
I mean, I think we absolutely should, right? And I think that's what this, I hope that's kind of what this document is attempting to resolve is what kind of information we are actually taking directly to the superintendent versus, you know, what we're sending through, you know, Let's Talk to be separated out. So I don't anticipate, I mean, I wouldn't hope that we are asking such weighted information that it takes more than 20 business days for us to receive information. You know, this is merely a presentation of you know, an ability to have a discussion of a suggestion that came in.
Yes, board
I
member.
always
Benefit.
kind of do the devil's advocate thing. So I'm not accusing anybody of doing this or think that anybody would do this, but I see that there could be a potential issue if somebody wanted to make it an issue wherein every request would take more than 20 days. So then it would go to the executive committee, who then would have the option to approve the request or deny the request and stop the process of releasing the information. And so I do see where it would be helpful, but I also see where it could potentially be harmful as well.
Yeah, and I don't want to see it escalate to. I mean, my preference is always to broaden the conversation and transparency. So I wouldn't stop at the executive committee, but you know, requests for information, like an engaged constituent, right? Who doesn't have information readily accessible to them. And so,
So,
is it inappropriate to ask our superintendent to weigh in? If she
except
sees,
that she's not here. She's
well, our acting,
our Mr. Hawkins.
our COO, our chief operating, or no, yeah, deputy operating.
Yes, ma'am.
Operations.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. What I'm hearing again, and I don't want to speak for you all, but something that takes analysis, right? So back to an example, if the question was like, how many gates have we painted red in the district since 1950? That may not be information that's readily available to us, and we would have to go through records if we had them, if we didn't, and what I'm hearing again is kind of what's the relevance and is that best use of time, you know, and I guess that would be determined through a relationship between the superintendent and the board member that's asking the question. But what I was hearing early on in my head was kind of the relevance to what we're doing. Everything has relevance and everything has purpose, but it was just kind of that's what I heard from board member Jackson, not speaking for you, but that was kind of what I was hearing. And I think, you know, it in my head, it kind of goes along with kind of like IPRA guidelines. And I know that's a different story, but you know, when people ask for information, if we have it, we produce it, right? As you know, that's something we give up. If it's something that we have to go or we don't have, then there's some further discussion that's had. And that could either, you know, following the law, right? That could be changed. And I know that's different for the board, but that's what I'm hearing. So, you know, it wouldn't, in my mind, it wouldn't be blocking any kind of information that we had. It's more of the analysis and the purpose on the other side. So
I'm reluctant to spend more time on this because we've got 21 minutes left. And I remember on our survey, we said, let's try not to solve problems that don't exist. So can we just reiterate that if a constituent wants information, we direct them to Let's Talk. We know that it's not in our lane to ask for the history on, you know, to use your example, Dr. Huck, is how many, something small like I was gonna say silly, like red, how many fences have been painted red? I know we're gonna get more serious questions than that, and I would say I would leave this alone until there's a problem with it. And Board Member Jackson, you have your hand up.
I'll just wrap it up by saying that I think, Mr. Hawkins, that the answer to what he said is actually laid out for us in number 2 at the beginning of the policy, where it says the board members will respect the delineation between governance responsibilities and operational duties. And I would think that an operational question is going to be something that would probably be more time consuming, but that also gives the superintendent and her staff the ability to have those discussions with board members, that if I do come to him and her and say, no, I really want to know how many gates have been painted red, the superintendent has a policy that she can point to say, you know, I'm really sorry, that's not a question that's in your lane, and here's the policy. And so it kind of creates that guardrail that we need. So
I think we resolved it.
I'm fine to leave it as is, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
I just want to throw out there that our responsibility and comments also pertain from community. And so the urgency, if it is a community issue, then we can push that through, do what's needed. And if there's a response that needs to go back to them, then I think that's our lane and that's our area. But other than that, like Courtney said, it's still those areas with superintendent, and what she needs to follow also has to be her issues and her lines that she needs to draw.
Okay, so I'm gonna move on. Because there is another, I've got something here. So Board Member Astorga, just correct me if I'm wrong. I've got a note that you were going to provide a quick clarification regarding number 8.
Yes,
Was
but
that number 8? Go ahead.
I believe Member Jackson had her hand up to continue, but I'll jump in. So I'm first gonna, since we were at the bottom, I'm gonna go all the way to the bottom where it says request from constituents, community members, elected officials, and the media. So all of that, it has been striked, but the intention for that was to actually have a discussion to see if we can move that section to 4P, which is under community engagement. So it wasn't necessarily to remove that from 4R, it was, or from the governance manual, but just from 4R and move it to 4P. So that is under community engagement. So that's just one thing that I'll leave open for right now.
Are there any disagreements about that? Okay. It's
Sorry,
not.
Madam
Okay.
Chair. So no disagreement at all. I think it can be incorporated. I don't know if right now it needs like word for word, because I think there's probably going to be some overlap between what was written in 4P as it relates to requests for constituents to what is already in 4P. So I would caution the committee from right now just cutting and pasting it into 4P because there might be overlap. But that information pertains absolutely more to community engagement than it does to requests for information.
So we'll
Okay.
consider that language when we talk about community engagement. Okay. Board Member Tomorito.
I also think that whether we condense it, keep it precise, I still think it needs to be within this communication piece, because it is communication, and that it addresses media and those pieces that it should in some form stay here, whether we revise it or make it different, only because it is part of the communication needed for media. That's my response.
Okay.
I like the suggestion to leave the it would be number 7. I think you're talking about, Member Tomorito, about the media inquiries.
Yes. Is there any other?
I'm sorry, which part are you talking, which,
So
what media
under
inquiries? Where
number
are you?
7, number 7. Under request, the portion that
Oh.
has been struck entirely. So there's a suggestion that we keep some language in this section, particularly because we need to address number 7.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe come back. It's sounding like we need a little bit more time with this language. Okay, so
Okay.
let's see what we can devise for this portion to address, it sounds like media. And yeah, media in particular. And I have a suggestion because I'm eager to get to the next item, but I don't want to rush. But I also don't want to belabor. So in item number 9 under or addendum for request for information, items 8 and 9 read, if a request is denied and the board member wishes to pursue it, they may email the board president and superintendent to request, and this is what I highlighted, request it be placed on a future board agenda. And I just want to point out that the precedent on this board has been to clarify deadlines. So, request it be placed on a future board agenda, that's too loose for my satisfaction. So can we agree that this needs more work? Board Member Tomorito, ad hoc chair of the RFI, or board members on this policy committee?
Do you have a suggestion for language you would prefer?
Well, I mean, I recently read 20 days, on the next board agenda. But I know that requires more conversation with staff, because board agendas get staff and the president and policy chair, perhaps, because those
So-
agendas are in high demand.
Chair Dominguez, would it be good to say something along the lines of would be placed on the board agenda once fulfilled, or once request is fulfilled, something to that nature, so it gives staff time to fulfill the request, and then we can put it on that next board meeting agenda?
Well, this is items 8 and 9 are about if a request is denied
Oh, right, you're right.
and the board member wishes to pursue it. And this also raises a whole other point that I'd like to mention. How do we make these requests transparent so that we are all aware of the requests for agenda items? And I bring this up because number 9 reads, if the majority of the board supports the request, the superintendent will ask staff to fulfill it. Well, how does the rest of the board know if there's even a majority? And I'm going to hearken back to August, when there was a request on the executive committee to put a charter school workshop on the agenda, and that never happened. And I know there was a majority who wanted that. So how do I think we need language here that, again, timeline and transparency, promotes transparency. Board Member Jackson.
So I think just reading it, I'm not disagreeing, but 9 is following from 8.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
8 is saying that if the request is denied by the superintendent, that the board member can say, well, I want this request discussed in public on the agenda. So so it's just the request that's put on the agenda. And then 9, so 9 follows 8. And so then that request of I really want to know that how many gates are painted red, we discuss it in public. Then if 4 of us say, yep, all four or 7 of us want to know that, that's where that majority of the board language is coming from to say, so it's the request per se of what that one board member is asking for. And then if the majority of the board says, yes, we really do want to know about this, then that pushes the superintendent to action that she does have to fulfill that request. So it's not you asking per se, it's the actual request, the actual bit of information that you want to know. If that clarifies what 8 and 9 are actually saying.
Okay. So that takes care, I think, of defining a future board agenda, right? But it does not address the transparency issue. So how do we all know when a request from a board member has come through, and how do we figure out if there's I mean, we all need to weigh in, and we need to be able to do that, honoring OMA and the rules and regs that govern us. But we also need to promote transparency. Board Member Benavides.
Actually, Board Member Astorga's had her hand up first.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Benavides. I was just wanting to say that I agree with the transparency piece, and just wanted to give kind of like an example or context, because I know Board Member Dominguez, you had sent out a request for that charter school training through email. And the reason that it wasn't put on an agenda was because no other board members responded to it with their interest, which is also a hard thing to do, because I know board members were confused if that would have been rolling quorum or not. So that's why nobody responded. But in the end, the consequence was nobody was interested, quote unquote, because there was no response. So I don't have an answer, but I am on the same page with you when it comes to how do we provide that transparency and what that would look like. I would assume that once the request is given to the superintendent and president, that it would be put on the next agenda, and that's how all board members would know. But yeah, I just wanted to give some of that context too of what happened before.
Right. And I'm glad you did mention that, because that's still not, that clearly didn't work. Right? So what's the avenue for all board members knowing that a request has come through, a request for not painting gates, but something actually very valid. We want a charter school workshop. How I want it, how do I know? That piece is missing here. Board Member Benavides.
Thank you. Just to kind of put a point on it. If the request is denied, the board member wishes to pursue it, they may email the board president and superintendent to request to be placed on a future board agenda. We haven't decided when that board agenda is going to be, hopefully the next board agenda, but then it's placed on the agenda, and that is where we all become aware as board members of what the request was. And there is the transparency piece, unless I'm misunderstanding the process entirely.
Yeah.
Okay, but here's where the stickler stuff is. It's not quite that easy, because as you will see in the self-eval, in one of the evaluations, it's you will not have more than 5 agenda items. And so, and do we really want an agenda item to request a meeting? I mean, it really is a conundrum.
It doesn't have to be a conundrum. I think the fact that we are focused on student outcomes, and that's what 50% of our meetings are supposed to contain, and a request, it doesn't necessarily meet that. It doesn't meet that guideline or I don't know, regulation, for lack of a better term. And so it's up to us to use this judiciously. And it kind of regulates itself. We know we're not supposed to spend more or less than 50% of our time in a meeting. And so it's up to us as board members to decide, is this something that I need to pursue to have placed on the agenda because it's been denied in the initial request. And it's something that we need to think about individually, I think. How important is it based on what our governance manual tells us we are supposed to be spending our time on?
Okay, and I can tell you that charter schools, a charter school workshop, I think you can argue. I think it's possible to have a leader argue that it doesn't apply to student outcomes. I would argue it differently, but I think that's still something that we need to be discussing. Not everything we do is student outcomes, progress monitoring oriented, but it's still valid. So to get back to this, number 9, if a majority of the board supports the request, how do we know that there's a majority? That's the question. How do we know when someone submits a request? Board member, whoever had her hand up first.
Thank you, Member Dominguez. I think Member Benavides really did clarify what that looks like for me, and it would fall, if I'm, you can correct me if I'm wrong, any of the board members, but it would fall under a discussion item as a request on the board agenda. So
Okay.
we would all have a discussion about your request, and that's how we would know what the majority is. But also, I don't want you to feel so constrained because of the 50% of minutes that we're spending on SOFG. Because if we're doing our job, we're already doing that. And hopefully a small discussion around this request won't take us over our limit. But also, if it's something that the board member feels that is important to discuss, then they shouldn't feel like they don't have a voice in order to put that on the agenda and have that discussion. So I don't want to say that we are limited in that way when it comes to our time use, but as Member Benavides put it, we should be aware and decide individually if that's something that should be placed on the agenda.
I'll just, I'm going to give ditto marks to what Member Benavides said. She clarified it very succinctly, especially laying out the way that this policy is even written, that the level of information that we should be requesting, it is laid out how we should be requesting that. But I just want to clarify that, because you asked the question of how do we know if the majority of the board supports it. Number 9 is very specific. That is once it is being discussed at a board meeting. So the way you know if a majority of the board supports the request, it's by 4 or more members on the dais during the discussion of this request saying, we support this request. That's what number 9 is very specifically. It's the physicality of sitting on the dais at a board meeting. That's how you know if the majority supports it or not.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the charter school example. And board members Tom Morito and Astorga, you were on the executive committee. So what held up how should that have been handled so that it became an item on the agenda? Should that have been a request to the superintendent and a written email to the president and the superintendent?
So what happened was we got the request, and since you sent it through email, that was the way that we were able to respond as board members with our interest. But because there was no quote unquote responses, because I know that there might have been interest, but there was no responses to that email, then the request was denied to put it on the agenda because there wasn't the majority of board members wanting that on the agenda. But again, I do want to clarify that I think the problem was we didn't want to, have rolling quorum when we responded to the email. So I do believe that there was confusion on that. If that request was sent out and we emailed, then we would,
Except that okay, I'm having difficulty with that thinking because I voiced the concern, I voiced the request. You and board member Tom Morito were in agreement, but it didn't end up on the agenda.
because there was
So,
a process for the full board members to come into majority. So nobody responded to your email with an interest. And again, we're learning what that process is like, but that was the discussion during our executive meeting.
so and you can tell we're down to, we're down to 13 minutes.
And
we'll
I
have
only
to
want to say
re-
this, that was a problem with that way of reporting. Because if we're going to use the email system and the whole process of rolling quorum, then it's going to defeat the purpose in really getting someone's message out. So hopefully with this policy, the problem I'm seeing is that I hope with a fair issue, if it's charter schools and the request goes to president and superintendent, that the issue is valuable, that it goes onto the agenda. And then if it's a valuable and a concern with one board member, that it would make it onto the agenda. Instead of thinking that it has to be all members don't make it an issue, so I'm not going to make it an issue, so I'm not going to put it on the agenda. So I think by the policy, and if there's a denial of one board, then passing it on or making sure the president and the superintendent put it on the agenda is the question. And how concerned the issue, I don't know if it pertains to them and they feel there's an urgency to put it on the agenda, but I'm hoping with the policy that it just goes forward and then is put on the agenda. Yeah.
I want something more concrete. So I'm going to come
Yeah.
back to you. I'd like to, I'll get to you, Board Member Jackson. I'd like to hear Board Member Benavides respond to the issue, the very specific issue of the charter school, the request to put charter schools on the agenda. So,
Okay, so just to be clear, we're talking about something that happened in the past to try to help give us clarity as we put things on the agenda moving forward, but
right.
this isn't necessarily a request for information issue, correct? I mean, I'm happy to do it, but I just want to be clear that I
Yeah,
think
I
that we're
don't-
kind of getting off the agenda
Getting
by
off.
seeing what happened. But just in my
Okay.
own personal view, I think that there was a missed opportunity for anybody to have taken that issue and just made it clear that they wanted it to be on the agenda. And it could have been me. It could have, obviously it was you, Josefina, because you brought it up. It could have been the other members of the executive board advocating for it as well. And so, maybe, I know we're not supposed to have a quorum and really speak to each other about issues, but if something needs to be said, make sure everybody knows about it. And I think it was just a matter of the ball was dropped in many different areas and communication's important. I don't know what the proper procedure is, but also this is not RFI related. So
You're right. You're right. Thank you for that reminder. And so we will we're going to have to work on this language anyway. And I think transparency needs to be figured out on this RFI when you start talking about majority of the board supports. So I'm going to move to Member Jackson, and I'm going to give you a minute to weigh in.
I just have 3 quick points. The first is that the how items are added to an agenda is already listed in 4K. So you can go back and read 4K, so that's already listed. I'm new to the executive committee, but I am aware that the executive committee does have a document or notes or minutes, and those are publicly posted for the board. So if there was ever any concern that something was maybe not discussed by the executive committee, it would be reflected in the notes that all the board members are able to view. That's not hidden. It's not just for the executive committee to see. All board members have access. And then the final point is that in number 3 of the RFI policy, it says board members will participate in a transparent process quarterly to evaluate requests made to staff. That is where some transparency does come forth. And when we participate in that that process quarterly, we're going to be able to see what kind of information has come forth from the board members so that we can identify trends, that we can potentially see if there's policy adjustments that need to be made. And that's where we're going to see what information came forth so that nothing is hidden. And that will be done quarterly according to the policy as written.
Okay. That helps with the clarification. So it's number 3 that I think is going to be the heart. Okay, and so we have 7 minutes left, and I'd like to clarify agreements here. What are we done with comments on? Well, it doesn't matter because we're out of time. So it seems to me, I need to check in with our policy analyst. Ms. Martinez, so what are your notes? What do they capture as possible next steps?
For possible next steps, Chair, on this document or in general?
Yes, no, on this, I mean, we only went through one document.
Yes. So we have, let's see, on 4R, item number 4, the language that reads readily available throughout the document is going to be changed to read readily accessible. That appears in 4, 5, and somewhere on the second page here. Oh, number 7. And we are leaving number 7 on page 10 of 81. We're leaving that as is, and we have no change to number 8 and 9. For the section on the last page that has been struck with the recommendation to move to 4P, we have discussed leaving number 7 in section 4R, but we are going to have to discuss that when we come to the governance manual. Is that your understanding?
I think they wanted to leave that number 7 media inquiries within the RFI in the request for information policy. I just don't know where yet. But that the rest of it would be moved to 4P.
Or some version of it, right? We'll work on language. I think there was some concern about it, the language in 1 through 6. And we can clarify that later.
I will say that number 7 media inquiries should be directed to the board president. That's actually listed, I think, in at least 2 other places in the governance manual already. So it could stay in the request for information policy, but it would be redundant to information that is already listed elsewhere, like particularly in the board officer section where it discusses the president's role. It does have a specific language to the media. So I think it's a discussion as to whether or not we want to have redundant language throughout.
And while I agree with you, if I'm a journalist, I'm gonna look at your request, you know, for information. I'm not gonna know to go. The first thing I'm gonna think of is request for information policy. And so it would be helpful
Pointing it out.
to have it there.
Well,
But
Go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's a form of communication. That's the only reason why I'm stating it should be there.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not saying for or against. I was just, you know how I am. I point out.
redundancy. Right. And that's good. I mean, it's good to know where it is in the other parts of the governance manual. So, then how do we want to do this, committee? In 1 minute and 33 seconds. Since board member Tom Morito and I worked on this, and I don't think we break quorum if we do the work, or does someone else want to pick it up? Someone's
Well, I
got
guess
to
my
work on
question
it.
is that this is supposed, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Dominguez. So this was supposed to be the second read, and this is now this is an action item that we're supposed to vote whether or not we're going to move this forward to the full board. So I think that is actually the pertinent question is, are we moving this document forward to the full board as per, you know, the policy scope and development policy, or tabling it as an action or postponing it as an action to a future policy meeting until it is complete?
So policy chair, in this case, determines if amendments need further study, that an additional reading would be desirable. So our scope and policy does allow for a third meeting. And then we want to make sure that it's final. So we've got 1 minute. So I'm suggesting that we continue the work, we postpone the approval and continue the work, taking comments into consideration. Is that fine? And board member Astorga Ramos and Jackson, do we need to make a motion to that end?
I think board member Jackson is
Froze.
Oh, yeah.
Frozen.
But from what my understanding is of what she just shared, we do need to make a motion to either table this or move this forward. And I believe we might have to do that for the other action items as well. If we're
Okay,
not continue.
so may I have a motion to authorize board member Tom Morito and I to continue working on this for a third read and a second to that end. And I guess the motion also has to say to move the remaining items to February's meeting.
I'm happy to make the motion. I'm just curious about the portion where we have to include that the authorization for the ad hoc committee to move forward with the work. If somebody could give me clarity on that, that would be helpful.
On Dr. Albright, she might be able to guide us in the right direction.
I'll tell you what the board manual says.
I believe that first, Board Member Jackson needs to amend her motion because there is a motion on the floor to accept this as is.
Okay, I'm back. I don't know what
Oh,
happened.
good. There you go. Did you hear any of that?
No, I just got here. I'm not sure what's going on with my computer.
Okay. So Dr. Albright, could you direct Board Member Jackson regarding the motion that she has to read?
So we have a motion on the floor, Board Member Jackson, made by you and seconded by Board Member Astorga to accept the RFI policy conversation. So in order for us to not do that, I think you need to amend your motion. And Board Member Astorga needs to approve the change, and then we can move forward from there.
And and I missed the change. I'm sorry. What amend it to change it to what? I'm to not
table
move it forward.
To table the conversation until the following policy committee meeting, correct?
Okay, so to postpone until a future time.
There was also a question, though, of reauthorizing the ad hoc committee to continue the work.
Okay.
Or
But
you can
very
drop that, or you can drop that language, make it easier and just go directly to authorize Board Member Tom Morito and myself to bring this, the discussions, the comments.
So the only person who can reauthorize an ad hoc committee currently is the president, so I cannot make that motion.
Right.
But so that would need something that we'd have to have President Gonzalez reauthorize the ad hoc committee.
We don't need to reauthorize the ad hoc committee. I think if we just, so maybe you were frozen at this time, but I asked, how do you all feel about Board Member Tom Morito and myself working on this to incorporate the comments to get it past the finish line in February?
Okay, and commit, and yeah, I think that's fine because I don't think that the ad hoc committee has actually been disassembled, right? Like you guys are still you're still authorized as the committee.
Either way, I don't want to make this.
That's not a motion that I can make either way. So I will move to amend my motion to postpone the discussion of the 4R RFI policy to the next policy committee meeting in February.
Is that accurate enough, Dr. Albright? Or are we postponing action?
That's fine.
Okay.
And I approve and second the new amended motion.
Okay, so next steps. Do we
Roll
need to
call.
make another roll call vote?
Do we need to include everything else on the agenda that we didn't get to, though?
Not
Or is
yet.
that a separate motion? That's a separate motion.
Separate, okay, sorry.
No, good.
So this is a roll call vote on simply continuing the discussion for 4.1 to the February policy meeting in basic summary.
Yes.
Janelle Astorga,
Yes.
Ronaldo Tom Morito,
Yes.
Heather Benavides,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes. Now we need another motion to move all other action items, action items 4.2, 4.2 through 4.8 to the next policy committee meeting. I need someone to motion that, please, in a second.
I move that we, is the proper terminology table or postpone?
Postpone is the proper terminology.
Okay. I move that we postpone items 4.2 through 4.8 to appear on the February policy meeting agenda. This is Board Member Benavides.
Second,
I will second Tomorito.
may I have a roll call vote? Dr. Albright, please.
Janelle Astorga,
Oh, yes, sorry.
Ronaldo Tomorito,
Yes.
Heather Benavides,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
No. And if I may just make a comment, two ad hoc committees have put in a lot of work on the agenda items that are here on 4.2 through till the end. And if we're going to be respectful of each other's time, I think we could have put in the work tonight to complete this. So my vote is no.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes, and I will give grace, understandably. All of us. I've been waiting since September to birth this 2 revisions. So I understand the frustration. But we are learning as we go, and growing pains and frustration are part of the process. We need to be curious about why things happen the way they do and find the mistakes, figure them out. But above all, we need to do the work right. We can't rush. The rushing has created some real problems and has wasted staff time, by the way. I've spent a lot of time with our policy analyst and with Board Member Astorga, trying to figure out the mess that's on the master draft revision that your ad hoc worked on. So, I mean, so diligently. But I have to say that we need to do our homework before we come here. I'm happy to have conversations. And so, yes, my vote is yes. And so, with that, let me get to my agenda. Rick. The next policy committee meeting will be Monday, February 3rd at 5:15. And I want to stress this is a change of 15 minutes, 5:15 virtually. And you can watch us on the APS Board of Education YouTube channel. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.